that almost never happens, but there are a few of them like that. Okay. Here again, we've got birth dates. We're after 1900. Here's a cylinder stone, and that is to refer to rest. Old cemeteries are some of the best places to find prairie plants. If markers are not trimmed around, very often there will be prairie grass grows up there, even today. Even if it's been mowed for 100 years, if you quit, prairie grass will grow back, sometimes within a year. It just sits there and waits for you to give up. And but here again, Magdalena, his wife. But occasionally there will be some that'll say his sister. Okay, questions? Look around. I want you to do some investigating here.
No, you went too far.
John S., son of P. and M. Whitmer, 24 years of age. The Lord knoweth them that are his own. And what is that? Anything other than a name and date is an epitaph. Sweet rest in heaven. Here are some of the older markers. 3 of them right here together. And what's the symbol on these markers?
Pointing up to heaven.
Pointing up. And sometimes it will say, meet me in heaven, by that. And I think there's one in this cemetery where the hand is pointing down. And what does that mean? It actually doesn't mean what you think it does. A hand pointing down is the hand of God coming to retrieve your soul, is what that symbol means.
Where are the hands opposite? Like this hand's pointing down.
One's a left-handed, one's a right-handed.
That's all?
And I've never seen that before, side by side. Here we have Psalm 23, a verse from that. These are marble markers. Marble came from the northeast part of the United States. Does not weather well. It becomes more porous as time goes, and lichens get into the pores and they deteriorate. So marble is not a good Iowa substance, but it the granite that we see now that we use lasts much better. But when Iowa was young, we were not able to carve in granite. It was too hard. Okay, what should happen with a marble marker is it should be tilted slightly so the printing is headed down just a little, and it will weather better that way. These markers should never, and if some of you did this, that's okay, never be set in cement. The cement is harder than the marker. So if you bump it with a riding lawnmower, it breaks. Now, I'm redoing a whole bunch of markers in my cemeteries, and when there's a marble marker like this, I will dig down, put it at the angle I want it, and then bury a cement block in front of it and back of it. That stabilizes it, and if you bump it, there's motion, and it doesn't break.
Mike, why is it supposed to be pointed down?
So if this is right here, all the water goes right down on here. If it's tilted slightly down, that protects it weather-wise.
Okay.
Here's another epitaph. Most of these can be read, but something, and maybe you've already done this, hopefully you have, that every single inscription is written down somewhere. And that should be. And if it isn't, try to get that done. Also, I found in this cemetery there are a number of sets of twins, adult and children and infant twins. Here we have Daniel P. and David J. born the 16th of February, 1885, twin children of the riches, and it says, meet us in heaven. And I like that. I've never seen that on any other marker. What do we have here? Can some of you see what that is? A dove. And the dove is carrying rosebuds. A rosebud is a symbol of a child. So a dove carrying a rosebud is carrying the soul of a child to heaven. So the dove is usually on a child's grave, and here we have two rosebuds. This one, I can't tell if it has one or two, but the two rosebuds would be for twins usually. Okay, doves are a symbol of children. A lamb is a symbol of a child. And if you have an adult that has a lamb on the marker, that usually means that that adult had the mind of a child their whole life. And we would say a mentally disabled person or something. But you were very often identified in the cemetery by your disability. There's one in Washington that's listed as a deaf mute. Now, that's kind of sad. That's how we identify. I always told my students, I said, now shape up or yours is going to say dumb kid on there. But, now we don't put things like that on markers.
Mike, what are the clasped hands right here?
Okay, clasped hands. Clasped hands usually symbolize a married couple. Not always. Sometimes it is a father saying goodbye to a child.
Okay.
Sometimes it is God's hand retrieving a child. So all of these are the things in the book of symbols. We talk about all those. But then there's always the chance that somebody didn't have much money and this was a marker that was already at the store and they just got it. People used to do things like that. But here, clasped hands usually are a married couple. This obviously is not that. But here we have a smooth or simple cuff and a fancy cuff. And that usually is a husband and wife.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, there's a marker, but we don't know where the grave is. There's a grave, 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 grave. So probably that will go there. Okay? Is this a child? Another child. Little girl died of a high fever in February. Blonde hair, blue eyes. She was 2 years old. There is. I can say that, and you can't prove me right or wrong. So. But this marker should probably be on that. Okay. Now, I know some of you are not where you can see when I start talking about things. Notice the gold-colored stuff on this marker. Anybody know what that is?
Lichens.
Lichens. Lichens is a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae. The fungus collects moisture and the algae makes food. They cannot live separately. Now, some people just think you have to get a wire brush and brush that off the marker. Don't ever take a wire brush to a marker because you're taking off. Now, granite, not so much, but the marble ones, it takes off a whole layer. Now, this deteriorates the stone. If we were to come back in 100 years, it would be, 5/100ths of an inch thinner. It's not going to be significant. Usually we don't see this when the stone's out in the bright sun. Usually it's more in the shade. But this is something that really damages marble, does not damage granite that much.
What's the ivy symbol?
ivy. There are several different ones. It can be ivy or it can be a vine. And they have different meanings. Ivy is faithfulness. And a vine can symbolize the blood of Christ of wine. So sometimes there's different ones. But thank you for asking.
That could be grapevine.
It could be.
Damn it.
Yes.
How do we clean that stuff off of grave markers? It's all over Georgia.
If it's marble, you might just rub it off with your hand. Don't use wire. Don't use chemicals. If you use a chemical, we don't know what that how that treats it on down the way. On a granite one, you can take a little bit more aggressive because it doesn't hurt it that much. But on marble, copy down the inscription and rub off what comes off. But almost anything you do to take it off is damaging.
So just water and
Yep.
a flag.
Yep.
Okay.
This is one of the more special markers in this whole cemetery.
Oh.
Now, I don't know this lady. Isn't it a lady?
Yep.
But this would be very difficult to do. To carve it in this shape. Has the Book of Life. And it's right by a driveway. I'm sure they weren't showing off since they're buried in Eicher. But here we have the gates of heaven. And they're opening in. They're welcoming Lydia into heaven.
Is that the first minister's wife? No.
Oh, I need to ask, was Christian Eicher Benjamin Eicher's brother? Might have been. Okay. The reason I asked that is I have Christian Eicher's house. I moved it several years ago. And it's one of the things I collect is houses. And it was a log house built in 1840 by Christian. I think Christian's buried in Somers Cemetery.
And Benjamin Eicher was here in this song.
This shape is an urn. An urn is one of the oldest symbols you find in a cemetery. And an urn means death. Now, sometimes there will be a cloth carved over it, and that means we're sad because of that death. Urn and a seashell are some of the oldest symbols you'll find in a Christian cemetery. A seashell says that the body is here, but the life has gone on to heaven. And so you'll find seashells as part of ornamentation around markers. This is one of those that is very rare in other cemeteries, not in this one. Katie was the wife of J.T. Winger and the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Widmer. You usually don't see both on a marker, so that's very unusual. Okay. And here we have a child's marker, aged 10 weeks. Not in this cemetery, but there's one that says, I found it says aged 1 hour, and one that says aged 0 years, 0 months, and 0 days. Here's a book of life that's open, and some ivy around here, and the gates of heaven. And here's another one with the gates of heaven. You have more gates of heaven here than most cemeteries, and they're all opening inward. Now, usually, back there we had a dove above the gates of heaven, which is a flying or a heavenly body. Other things that can be there to welcome you to heaven are heavenly symbols. Moon or stars are often on a marker. And we use that moon and stars where? Beside a cemetery. None of you are probably old enough to be before indoor plumbing, but you maybe have heard of people that had to go out, and what was on the doors of?
Outhouses.
A moon and star. And a moon stood for women Stars stood for men. I've only seen one privy with a star on it. But there are a lot of them that people just assume that the moon means privy. It means privy for a woman, because that's a woman's sign. Star, I think, is mostly because men didn't need privies as long as there were cornfields and things. So.
We know.
This is my great-grandma, but she doesn't have her maiden name Eicher on it.
Well,
She died, he remarried and had, but yeah, she only had one daughter, which was my grandma.
okay, so we have Anna, wife of Peter Miller, and she has one of the most common poems with the most variations of any. Kind friends, beware as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you must be. Prepare, therefore, to follow me. And I always thought that would kind of straighten your posture up just a little bit. But all different variations. Stranger, you there standing on my grave. As you are, once was I. As I am, soon you will be. Prepare to die and follow me. You know, that person didn't have a sense of humor at all. Okay, this one, and I don't know the history, some of you may.
The sun's right over there.
This is a field stone, sometimes that are found on the farm. And I don't know. Does anybody know, is this a farm piece?
No.
So it was something he plowed around for a long time, and
Well, it was up by the house.
somebody else plowed around it and moved it. But that's neat when you use a field
We
stone.
don't have it engraved yet, but it's, yeah.
You're going to get it engraved.
Do you have the poem picked out?
I'm learning now. I'm learning about all these symbols and signs.
Yeah, always put up your own grave marker. Don't trust that to somebody else, because everything you put on a grave marker means something. Each flower has a separate meaning. My favorite is the flower cleome, which we still grow, a spider plant, and grows in gardens. And if you put that on a marker, it says, they were very nice, but just awfully strange. Now, you don't want to risk somebody putting that on your marker. If you're a woman, the highest compliment you can be paid is a full-bloomed rose. So, you know, order a rose. If you're a teenager, it was a partially closed rose. An infant was a completely closed rose. The highest compliment you can pay a man on a grave marker is oak leaves. It means he was a good spiritual leader of that family. So, pick what you want people to know about you and get it carved in stone before somebody else decides to have a sense of humor. Here's another hand pointing up. Here we have ivy and oak leaves. And this is an epitaph that I've never seen anyplace else. Absent from the body, present with the Lord. Which is a neat epitaph. I've never seen it anyplace else.
You can see it in numerous cemeteries.
Really? I've been absent in every one of them. And I've never seen that before.
You haven't been where I've been.
Okay. We probably both can say that.
Yeah.
Here we have husband and wife and 2 children, but it doesn't list them as children. And what's unusual is that we have birth dates, which tells me that this marker was put up after the last death. And that's, you start putting birth dates on at that point. Raised letters. And maybe you found this in other cemeteries too. But this is the only marker I've ever seen that was put up by a church and said so. You know, it was important that the church be recognized for putting up Benjamin Eicher's marker. But this is amazing to have that much support.
Is he buried there?
Is he buried here?
Better find out.
Yeah, that's
So
probably.
you're thinking you might be buried several places? There's two. Now here it's got father and mother. And they're not buried there. They're buried behind the family marker. Usually they would be buried there, but they're not. They're here. So you could sell those lots again.
You can save, so now you're okay.
Well, and there's some people that are parents that you put there. There's room for dates. Okay, if you find something of interest, call my attention to it here. 'Cause I don't know how long I'm supposed to lead you astray here.
On the Conrad stuff. That was my grandfather's sister.
Okay, on the Conrad marker, and these are Conrads had barns that churches met in, didn't they? I think so. Okay, lilies. Lilies are usually on a woman's grave. They stand for purity. And they used to say men could never have lilies on their marker because men were never pure. Now, we know that isn't true. But in the 1800s, it was you would be talked about if you had lilies on a man's grave, because that would be signify that that was a pure person.
How did these meanings to the various plants and flowers, how did those arise?
There used to be many, many books of etiquette and things like that. There were books called The Language of Flowers and things, and those were just used a lot in poetry, and those transferred then to markers and cemeteries. It was a very poetic time. But some of these symbols also go back hundreds of years. Okay, somebody asked me about a Klopfenstein stone with no names on it, but there's Klopfensteins, I think, on either side.
Wife, husband, son.
So this, when it's just the last name, this is the family marker. And then we have the individual markers. What's on top of this? Can all of you see?
Torch.
A torch. And a lot of times you'll see torches and they're facing down. This one is horizontal, which is unusual. But there's a whole separate set of meanings for torches. But if you're going down, then your torch is about to go out. But this one, they're not sure yet.
Do you think newer tombstones will be different than what your
Oh,
history?
definitely.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, we're seeing more and more of the old symbols.
Mike, we got
Yep, I want to talk to those.
okay.
Okay, one of my students died several years ago in childbirth, which is very unusual today to have somebody die in childbirth. And she remembered her Iowa history class because on her marker she has a full-bloomed rose and a bud. That meant there is a mother buried there with a child, and they are buried in the same casket. And that is used to be very common because there are a lot of women died in childbirth. But this was a fairly recent one. It's in Elm Grove in Washington. And then she had partially bloomed rose for surviving children on that marker. Okay, these over here are some things that you'd be very pleased to have in Eicher Cemetery. Now some of you have maybe found these in a bunch of other cemeteries, but I have only found them in 2 cemeteries. They're wrought iron with a porcelain insert with gilt. And every one that I found is always written in German. So I assume that these was a tradition in the part of Germany that these people came from. And the other ones that I found are in a German cemetery